Hello and welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. I encourage you to like, share, subscribe, follow all those things. It also goes out on the Lilydale Assembly Facebook page as well as my YouTube channel. And the YouTube channel is where you can find all the archived videos of all the past years. This is year 9 of the Wednesdays with Willa podcast, and I've had so many wonderful guests and topics relating to spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I love having this spiritual discussion and sharing a treasure trove of information with you. And I'm delighted that today we're going to be talking about the spirit rooms of Jonathan Koons. So I'd like to introduce to you Sharon Hatfield. Sharon is an award-winning journalist as well as an author of historical nonfiction books, including a book that focuses exclusively on Jonathan Koons. So she's our expert for today about him, and she's going to share about that journey of how she found out about Jonathan Koons and wanted to know more and do this deep dive for the rest of us. So thank you. But also, what was it like for him in his life? Who was he and why is he important to spiritualism? So please welcome to the show, Sharon Hatfield. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Will. It's so great to be with you today.
Absolutely. I just want to tell people I had the great pleasure of meeting Sharon this summer at the symposium in Lilydale this past summer. She was a fabulous presenter and she spoke about Jonathan Koons. And you're going to probably get as excited as I did when I first heard it. With the things that she'll share with us today. He's a very significant person in spiritualist history, and we want to make sure that he's definitely highlighted. And so I hope Sharon comes back with more information. You never know, because my sense is that you do a lot of wonderful research and you really bring this to people so that you can uplift, but also humanize those aspects of people. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today to share about Jonathan Koons. So Sharon, who's Jonathan Koons? Why do I keep saying his name?
Well, he is a fascinating and enigmatic figure for sure. And he was born in um, Pennsylvania in the early 1800s. And at that time, everybody was going west to get farms and land. So he moved to Athens County, Ohio in the 1830s. And he got a farm there and he married a woman named Abigail and they started a family. But he was what we now call a seeker. He was not interested in traditional religion. He had been raised as a Presbyterian, but he had given up on it. And so he was considered an infidel, which he would admit. And so he was always seeking and looking for something that he could have faith in. And he found the spiritualism movement, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, came about with the Fox sisters in 1848. And Jonathan Koons in Athens County, Ohio, heard about this. He was quite an avid reader as well as a writer to newspapers himself. So he heard about this and he found out that there was a local medium and he went to visit her and with the idea of debunking the whole scene. And he ended up being interested in becoming a medium himself. So he did some automatic writing and a lot of meditating and so forth. And then he basically became a medium around 1852. And what was so amazing about it is when he opened his public spirit room, which is actually a log cabin, hundreds of people came to Athens County, Ohio, which is on the border of the Ohio River in the southeastern part of the state. And people were just blown away. You know, there was no internet, no radio, no TV, but somehow they found out about Jonathan Koons, partly through spiritualist newspapers, but also word of mouth. And so we can conservatively say that hundreds came to his spirit room, but possibly even thousands.
Yeah, from what you shared and what I've heard about him from before, it seemed that people kind of swarmed his space there, and I know you're probably going to get into that in a little bit. I think it's significant that during that time period of that movement, that spiritualist movement, really started to be very inspiring for people. People recognized that they had to, you know, experience it. Mediumship is one of those things you can talk about the theories of it, but you really have to kind of get in the water to see what it's like. And I love the fact that he got in the water. He was a little trepidatious, got in the water, but then he all of a sudden he realized how much he could connect with spirit and have his own movement there in Ohio for a bit. So would this be a good time for me to share a picture of Jonathan with
Sure.
folks, just so they can have a sense of who we're talking about, and as you continue to share with them about him. There we go. There he is. There's Jonathan Koons.
This came to us from Alan Taylor, who is a descendant of Jonathan Koons. We don't know exactly where it was taken or what the occasion was. You can see it's got a flag in the background, and it's some kind of formal occasion for which he's very dressed up. But in the reports that you get from the people who visited there, he was a rough-hewn farmer, and he was very kind of rugged looking and typical of a farmer in that period. But you can see here he did know how to dress up when the occasion called for it.
Mhm.
Another thing that he did was to involve his whole family. It wasn't just him, but he also, his wife, Abigail, converted to spiritualism. She had been a Methodist, and her father was actually a Baptist minister. So there we see him in the early 1850s with Abigail. This is around the time that the spirit room was up and running, and they were having guests, I'd say 4 to 5 nights a week while trying to run a farm during the day, and they had around 10 children. And so some of the children were also involved with spiritualism, and they were his oldest son, Nim, Nahum. He was considered the principal medium of the family, but all of them were involved with it.
I think once you have that basis in a family, it makes it easier because you can talk about things and you can experience things together. I myself, because my mother's a medium and I was raised with that understanding, it just makes it a lot easier. It's very supportive. And some people do develop more so than others in a family. That can absolutely happen. And was hope I'm hoping that you'll share a little bit about that dynamic of what it was like that people experienced when they attended. And oh, before I forget, I think it's a wonderful point that you make about the fact that they were busy running a farm. Anybody who's ever known about running a farm or can imagine what it's like to have the absolute need of what do livestock need, what do crops need, what's going on just to feed and clothe your family. And then on top of that, they're running these uh, mediumship experiments or sessions for people in the evenings. So let's build on that imagery.
Sure, well, people did come there for different reasons. Some people were already spiritualists, and they came there because they were true believers and they wanted to see manifestations or proof of what they already felt intuitively was the reality. Other people came there, a small minority, I would say, as debunkers, and they were allowed to inspect the layout of the spirit room. And we'll get more into the layout in a little bit, but They were allowed to look around in the daylight. The seances were conducted usually in the evening in the dark, but they were allowed to look around and check out how things were arranged. And then there was the third group that were just really there for entertainment, I guess. Just it was very theatrical, so they were there, I guess, more or less to see a spectacle. So you had different groups, but the Koons family had managed to create a very interesting scene, and that's why I call them Victorian hippies, because they had like a literary and political and artistic salon going. So when people would come there, they wouldn't just, go to a seance. It was like a total immersion. They would have speakers come in during the day, like talk about temperance, for example. And they would have artwork that hung on the walls that was created during the seances, some of it. So there was a lot going on. But the actual services, or what they would call demonstrations, they created so much joy in the participants that some of them did not want to go home. They wanted to stay in kind of this utopia as long as they could. And getting back to what you said about the farm, some of them would tended to just eat them out of house and home. So the Coonses did not charge admission. Now, that was one of the things that set them apart, I think, from some of the other mediums, is they didn't charge admission, but they did accept donations. Nonetheless, they were not making money off this operation, and in fact, it was quite a drag on them financially to try to feed and house all these people that came.
I can only imagine everybody descending and swarming, and there were so many that did that to the Fox sisters. And then knowing that these people were so generous with their food and with their time, and I'm sure they had some moochers
Yeah,
along the way, and it became quite difficult to know how to handle those people that seem to not leave, right? They'd want to stay.
right.
And I keep imagining how much the horror of that for me, because I mean I love people, but I also like to have my own space, and I wouldn't want to have constant guests and all of that all around me all the time as a sensitive. So how did do you are there any records of how they handled that kind of situation energetically for themselves?
Not specifically, but they really believe they were on a mission to prove the immortality of the soul. And Jonathan also, he liked to entertain and have people, and he played the fiddle, which was an important part of his milieu, I guess you'd say, because he would start the seances off by playing the fiddle and
Mhm.
sort of get everybody in more of a meditative state. So I think he really enjoyed it, probably the most of any of them.
Mhm.
But then there
But
were also just these really interesting characters who would come there because, as you already know, there was a lot of overlap between the different reformers of that era in the early and late 1850s, pre-Civil War. A lot of people were trying to abolish slavery, or not a lot, but a significant minority. And
Mhm.
then there were people that were advocating for women's rights. I noticed the prominence that was given to Susan B. Anthony at Lilydale,
Correct.
and other people were working on clothing reform, different dietary reform. There were so many things going on, and a lot of those people were naturally drawn to Jonathan. And um, one of the more interesting things I found out was, well, what was spiritualism trying to reform? And turns out it was Calvinism. Calvinism was the widespread belief that people were predestined to hell or heaven and that they had very little control over their future, which is really against the idea in spiritualism that you can progress even after you pass from this plane. You still have a chance to spiritually climb up the ladder to a higher awareness.
Yeah. Yes. And so, uh, were they actually doing any kind of advertising for this? Was it strictly word of mouth, or and showing up in some of the spiritualist papers and magazines, or did they actually put any ads into papers?
That's a great question. Very little, if any, advertising, I would say. Mainly, Jonathan wrote letters to the newspaper. He wrote a lot of letters, and as well as letters to individuals. And I'm so lucky I have three letters that he wrote in his own handwriting that he wrote to his friend William Denton, who was a geologist. But not a lot of advertising. He did advertise that he was a representative of a spiritualist paper, and if you wanted to subscribe in your area, he would be your agent.
Mm,
But as far as saying, come to the spirit room, they never had to do that because they had so many people.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
Now,
the fact, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
The fact that he was a writer was very influential in my deciding to write about him because when I started this, I knew nothing about Jonathan Koons. I happen to live in Athens County, Ohio. I'm originally from Virginia, but I moved here with my husband many years ago to go to graduate school. And so that's how I found out that Jonathan Koons had lived in this area, the same county that I live in. And so that was like really interesting. And I maybe I could do a nonfiction book, but
Right.
is there enough material? And that's when I found out that he actually wrote a lot of newspaper accounts so we could kind of get into his own head.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found out he had written an 11-part autobiography of himself in a newspaper, that was just like, okay, I've got it now. I can do this as a book.
Yeah, you struck gold.
Right, right.
Oh, I love that's part of it. You know, so much in history can get lost, but if you're able to find those little nuggets along the way, bring things back to the surface, as it were, in the archaeological dig through documents and papers, and you're so well suited to that with your journalist background. I can imagine that you were eating it up with a spoon. So,
Yes, and my poor husband had to listen to every every little thing I found out he would hear about it. So he
so,
heard a lot.
so he might be able to do the lecture himself someday. Haha.
No kidding. No
Be
kidding.
interesting to see what his version would be.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of a woman's point of view, that was one of the frustrations, was
Oh,
trying to get information about Abigail Koons, Jonathan's wife, because the proper Victorian ladies were not mentioned in the paper very often. So in those 11 long newspaper articles that Jonathan wrote about his life, she gets one paragraph. And in it, he says that he was very attracted to her because she was a free thinker, that
oh,
she wasn't into religious dogma, that she was open-minded, and he loved that. And that's part of why he fell in love with her. And I do believe they were probably equal partners because her father and mother, Abigail's parents, divided their property before they died. They divided it amongst the children, and there were two daughters and several boys, and they gave them all equal shares of the property, which is really unusual for that time because the women would usually get a feather bed or a cow or a saddle, and the men would get the land.
Right, right.
So she
That's
owned her own property even after she was married.
a good point. And then who inherited that after her passing?
Well, actually, the family moved to Illinois, and
Oh, maybe we
before
should
they
save that
moved,
one.
they
Yeah.
sold off everything that they owned here.
Right, right. I remember that now. I was going to ask in terms of Abigail, did she sit in on most of the seances and events there, or was she um more helpful in other kinds of background behind the scenes?
Well, both. Did participate in just about all the seances, as well as childcare, and would even have, little babies in her arms while the seances took place because she was still of childbearing age when this was going on. So she had a lot to deal with. But one thing that really attracted people to her was her abilities, allegedly to have second sight, that
Mm,
she could do remote viewing, as it's now called.
mhm.
I was always so fascinated as a little kid watching Snow White when they would do mirror, mirror on the wall. And was it the stepmother who would look in the mirror and
Yes.
see what
Who's
was
the
going on
mirrorist? Yeah.
with them all?
Like scrying in the mirror. Yes, yes.
Yes. So she, according to the report, she could do that. And she was also an herbalist. So if people would come there with various ailments, she would be able to give them some kind of herbal concoction. So she had her own talents, and we have one just a little mention that from a Canadian medium who visited them. He said that Jonathan hypnotized Abigail, and then he said, and when they were through with the session, he brought her out of this in the same manner that he put her into it. So we don't know how he did it. We just know that they were experimenting with hypnosis
Hmm.
as well, and of course, that was also used by Davis when
Yes.
he was
Mesmerism.
put into a trance
Trance.
state, and he would tell about the revelations that he had gotten from the spirit world.
Hmm. Hmm. And so can you tell us a little bit more about the oldest son who was the medium um, as well, the one who seemed to do a lot?
Okay, Nim was born, I think, in 1838, and so they opened the spirit room in 52. So he was about 14 when they started, and so it ran for 3 or 4 years. Here you can see him with his father, and aren't they dressed nicely there? This picture and the previous one were graciously shared by Brandon Hodge, and you can see they're posing for a portrait. Again, we don't know exactly where, but this probably was when they lived in Athens County. Nim was considered a physical medium. He A lot of the special effects, you might call it, which I haven't really gotten into, but they did have lights floating around, and reports of a trumpet that floated around, and different things flying around the room, almost like poltergeist type activities. And so a lot of this didn't happen unless he was there. So
Mm,
they did have seances occasionally when he wasn't there, but he was considered the powerhouse, really. And
right.
his father was also that, but he was also the kind of the intellectual and the spiritual leader, I would say, Jonathan. But then the son also provided a key piece of their religious beliefs because he went into trance and he drew a picture of the seven heavens, which was his conception of how there were different shells out from the earth and corresponding to your level of spiritual progression. So he went into a trance and drew this whole cosmology
Hmm.
of what they believed, and it was very interesting, and it was reproduced in a book uh, years later.
Amazing. And that kind of corresponds with some of the Eastern religion understandings as well, which I don't know that he would have been as exposed to in Ohio at that point. Just something he spontaneously received.
I don't think he would have known too much about the Eastern religion at that point because the Theosophy movement didn't really come along till a couple of decades later when they brought in the some of the Oriental concepts. So
Colonel Olcott was very much into that, absolutely. And I wanted to lean into the trumpet mediumship because Jonathan Koons and I guess you could say his family are credited with really evolving trumpet mediumship in terms of the history of spiritualism. And I, for those of you who don't know what trumpet mediumship is, who are just like, what are they talking about? That's when there would be usually a metal a lot of times nowadays it's collapsible, but sometimes it's metal, and it's an opportunity for spirit to manifest, maybe build some ectoplasm, so that they could be using that for uh, it, being the loudspeaker for spirit's voice. And the Koons family, Jonathan Koons, is credited with the evolving trumpet mediumship. What in your research can you tell us about that part of things?
well, he may be the very first to ever do this, as far as we know, but they used just a regular dinner horn, they said.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the medium through which King,
Right.
it was their guiding spirit, their principal guide.
Hmm.
King, as in just meaning a leader of a group of people. And
Hmm.
so through the trumpet, they were able to magnify King's voice, and he became a very important persona in the seances. And they did write down some of his sermons that even he could tell sermons or he could tell jokes. He was a very versatile entity, you might say.
That's right. And when I've been right in saying there's a distinction between this king and the kings that have shown up in other prominent mediums, scientific phenomenon as well, like Katie King and John King, those kind of kings. This is a different entity, correct?
I am so glad you brought that up, Will, because I feel like they're very separate entities. And I know that some people do conflate the two, but this king that appeared to the Koons family said he was 14,500 years old and that he was the head of a troop of advanced beings. And then the later John King, he and Katie King, they were somehow connected to this pirate Morgan.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just a separate thing, but a lot of people think, well, King appeared to Coons that way, and then he appeared to the next generation as John King, but I don't really go with that theory.
Right, right. It sounds like the wrong time period. The pirate, pirates. You know, it's like Pirates of the Caribbean. People love a good scallywag, as it were. So I think
Right.
that's where some of that came from. But I think it's good that you are making the distinction between the two. It's just like Smith. It's just like, there are all these common names that can come out from these things. Now, what other kinds of phenomenon should we focus on specifically with the Koons family and what they manifested in their seances?
Well, I think it's important to not only look at the remote viewing, but also was there some kind of telepathic communication going on? Because some of the people who came there um, came from hundreds of miles away, and they said that Jonathan Koons knew who they were as if he were expecting them and that he could tell their names. And this astonished them. And of course, you could say, well, maybe he had some other way of finding out, but there were a lot of these incidents. And also, sometimes people would come there and give fake names because either they didn't want to be identified with that or they were just testing him. But sometimes they would give fake names and he would tell them their real name. So, and then another medium, sometimes other mediums would say that they were communicating telepathically. So that
Mm,
part, I don't think we can rule out at all. He wasn't studied, so officially he wasn't studied. Like today,
mhm,
we had the field of parapsychology and we have very controlled experiments involving mediums. And so we have ways this day and age of looking at it more scientifically than they did then.
right.
But even with that, I don't believe he was really studied the way the Fox sisters were
Mhm,
rigorously studied.
yes. To their detriment, indeed.
Yes,
Mm,
yes.
mhm. So the telepathy, the trumpet mediumship, probably some direct voice from King during that time. And then you said that there had been, of course, um, Abigail's ability for remote viewing, and then there were also lights that would emerge with that, right?
Yes, they did have lights that would float around the room, and um, it could have involved their use of phosphorus. We're just not sure exactly how these lights were generated or what they meant, but they would have the room in darkness and they would use um, a phosphorus solution. They would dip their hands or they would dip objects or whatever in the phosphorus solution, and that would illuminate things in the room. Oh, we haven't really talked about the hands.
Oh, let's talk about the hands.
The hands, that was one of the things where I had to like read this twice. Like, did I really just read that these disembodied hands were there? And um, this is one area where they were accused of fraud at times because some people felt that when these hands would come out and write the messages to people, they were written at super speed, which was just amazingly fast, but yet they were legible. And so they would give messages purportedly from the dead relatives and friends and to give them to people in the audience. But then when I was watching one of the presentations at Lilydale, it showed an ectoplasmic hand in the photograph. So I really don't know what to make of it. Really, I don't. But they did have people trying to grab onto them and occasionally try to prove that it was just a person's hand.
Mhm. So when they were accused of fraud in that incident, did they actually catch someone, a human being, rather than a spirit clinging on to someone, or were they just accused? They weren't actually shown to have committed fraud. Is that correct?
That's a great question. There were really two incidents,
Okay.
and I'll explain about that. The first incident involved Reverend Fowler, who was a Harvard trained minister who converted to spiritualism, and he lectured all around the Midwest. And so he decided to come to the Koons farm not once but twice to investigate
Mhm.
because he thought that it was his duty to police the movement, and if there was fraud, he thought that he should be rooting it out. And so he came and did what I call a thought experiment.
Mm.
He um he figured out, well, maybe, the Coons family is just the one doing all this. And if you could put up the picture of the
Oh,
room, I could
oh,
I
sure.
could
I'll be able to
explain.
get that up there. Mhm. Let me get that right. Here you go.
Thank you. This is a picture that a local artist drew for me, Sandy Plunkett. And here in the square, which is numbered 1 through 7, it shows you the layout of the spirit room. And number 1 is shelving behind it. Number 2 are drums. Number 3 is a spirit machine was on this table. They had a machine that they felt um, might have been used to focalize the energy of the spirits, concentrate the frequencies, and so forth. Number 4 is the medium's table, and then the Nahum and his parents would sit around the table in those little squares, and then sometimes they would have visiting mediums who would come and sit in the other empty chairs there. And then number 6 was a little stove, a little heating stove that had a pipe that ran up to the ceiling. And then the last 2 benches were for the spectators. And this is all crammed into a 12 by 16 room. So you've got 2 schools of thought here. Um, Reverend Fowler believed that the Coonses controlled all of the room except for number 7, and that they could easily get up and run around, play the drums, and cause these special effects. But somehow they were going to have to be able to reach over into the audience too, because sometimes the people in the audience were touched by the trumpet or the flying tambourine and so forth. So we're not really sure how all these special effects could have been carried out in a place that crowded. But that was his theory that it was the Coons family causing the demonstrations. So he published his beliefs, his results of his thought experiment in the New England Spiritualist, which was out of Boston, and he just gave a blistering critique of the Coons family, and so Jonathan and his followers also staged a rebuttal, and so we know a lot about that episode from the New England Spiritualist. Now, the second incident we don't know nearly as much about. It occurred in Cleveland when Koons and his family were traveling on the road. See, at first they had the spirit room at their home in Athens County. The cabin was 6 feet from their home. But then later on, after they closed the spirit room in the fall of 1855, then they took their demonstrations on the road. And when they were up in Cleveland, they were in the home of a spiritualist who was a newspaper editor. And they claimed that a match was struck, and it showed that one of the Coons' children, the older daughter, was up moving around. So that I would love to know more about, but um, unfortunately, I've never been able to find the original newspaper account, just other newspapers that picked up on it and mentioned it, but I've never found the original.
Hmm. So those are the two main incidents that that they were accused of fraud. And
Hmm.
and did others write extremely positively about the experiences that they had at the Koons family spirit room?
Oh yes, the press was accounts were overwhelmingly positive. I'd say 90% to 10% because people would go there and they would become so inspired and joyful. Quite a few of them went back and created their own spirit rooms when
Hmm.
they got back home. So there were several in Ohio. We had spirit rooms in Cincinnati and Cleveland and Delaware County, Chillicothe, quite a few, but also Boston. A fellow from Boston started his own. There were some in Indiana, possibly out in Texas. So that's why we say that he was very influential in the spiritualism movement, that and also the trumpet that you mentioned.
Hmm.
And so he was a person that really was influential in developing spiritualist practice, but he didn't get nearly the publicity that some of the others got.
And I had another quick question about the spirit room in terms of this. So maybe I should put it back up on the screen. So just one moment
Sure.
while I get that back up. There we go. So with this, like you said, we have Jonathan, we have his son, we have Abigail, and then there was room for three other mediums, you said. Are those mediums from his family or visiting mediums? Those other three here?
I think he would prioritize visiting mediums if there were. So they might actually have taken away some of the chairs at times, but if he had a visiting medium, he would seat them by his side there.
Are there
So
records of who the visiting mediums were? Are any of them significant that we would recognize their names in spiritualist history?
Conklin was one that I name that comes to mind, but not like the Fox sisters or Emma Harding Britton. No one of that caliber that I'm aware of.
And back to the shelving, what would have been the point of the shelving? Do you know what was on those shelves or?
Well, they said that they had toys that they would distribute to people,
Hmm.
toys that they would give. I've never been able to find any account of anyone getting a toy. Just they would describe, and also they may have put some of their musical instruments on there or their artwork that they displayed. So those kind of things.
So did they have instruments that would play or float or anything like that? Like with the Eddie brothers in Vermont, they did a lot with that sort of physical phenomenon, instruments and music. Was that anything that showed up in the Koons family spirit room?
Oh yes, yes. Music was a big part of the demonstration. You can
Hmm.
see the drums there.
Hmm.
Uh, it would start with Jonathan blowing out the candle
Hmm.
at the seance, and then there would be this crashing sound of these two drums that could be heard way out in the forest.
Mm.
And that would, startle everybody. And then other instruments would start to play. And then sometimes there would be chanting or singing. And I tried so hard to find out what the words were to the chanting,
Yeah.
singing, and no one ever says, but people were very impressed with the music. Charles Partridge, the editor of the Spiritual Telegraph, talked about what sublime and wonderful music was heard there.
Mm. Hmm. And Jonathan, having been a musician himself, I'm sure would have attracted that kind of level of vibratory frequency too, because that was significant. Were there other members of his family that also played?
Well, we don't know. We don't know if they did or not. Of course, the critics would say, well, of course they did, but we don't know.
Right.
It was never reported on one way or the other, except when Reverend Fowler did his thought experiment, he mentioned that he had heard one of the daughters singing one of the same songs that was performed at the seance, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything one way or the other. I mean, she might have just heard it and learned it, or she could have been there performing it. We don't know.
So on the benches, approximately how many people for spectators would they have been able to fit in on the benches?
About 20 people, and they are raised like theatrical style, like in a movie theater.
Okay. All
So
right.
you can see that's a tight fit for a 12 by 16 room.
It is a very, very tight fit. I'm thinking, my goodness, you almost don't need the stove in there necessarily for certain people. Because it's
Right,
like, wow.
right.
And maybe another time we'll have to talk about the spirit machine and what was involved with that. But this was a spirit room that was then duplicated, as you were saying, in other spiritualist homes and spaces that in the surrounding areas around
Yes.
Athens, Ohio. And I I think it's amazing that this was able to come about. Was this something that was inspired by Jonathan or by his son in terms of the layout?
Well, they say they were instructed by the spirits and
Mhm.
given information on how the dimensions of the room, and then that they were instructed to buy the instruments. So as to how they decided on the tables, I'm not sure.
So they would have had etherealization, materialization, the other things that we've mentioned. Did they experience apports and wraps as well?
I don't know
Apports
of
being
any
objects and
apports.
wraps being, knocking like with the Fox sisters.
Okay, I don't know of any apports that were mentioned, but yes, they did do wrapping. They did do that. And yeah, that's the part I really didn't go into, but they started out rapping when
Mm.
they first started their circle.
Mhm.
And it was a very tedious process because
Yeah.
each letter of the alphabet, and you can imagine trying to transcribe a
Like,
sermon or
yeah, it's
something.
like, are we there yet?
Right, exactly. So that's what led to their developing the trumpet.
Sure. And to your not to your understanding of all this, did they ever have what's known as the spirit cabinet, or was that spirit room in effect one big cabinet? But did they ever have a cabinet like some of the physical mediums did?
I think that's a great question. I like your idea that the whole thing was a cabinet. I like that. But they never did have a cabinet, but what's interesting about your question is a lot of people believe that the famous Davenport brothers, who were world famous performers of that time, that they actually got the idea of a cabinet from Koons. That their development of the cabinet and tying themselves up and becoming stage musicians that they got, which also had a trumpet, that
Exactly.
they got some of their techniques from him, but he didn't get credit. In fact, they considered him a rival. I don't know if he thought they were or not, but
So it's interesting in terms of the Davenport brothers and their history because they were born up in Buffalo, New York, not far from Lilydale, and they were having phenomenon before the Fox sisters.
oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, they did as children. Ropes would tie around them. They had floating, and the neighbors were agog, of course, at the
I can
time. But
imagine.
that was pre the 1848 that that happened. So I think it's interesting how some of these different mediums and different things weave together in terms of the tapestry. But I'm sure some of this would have been shared not just by Jonathan in newspapers, but by word of mouth in the spiritualist movement. So who knows? Maybe the Davenport brothers did go down there and see what was happening. But it really is fascinating. I know that there are some probably other aspects to all of this. Are what in terms of Athens, Ohio, before we talk about the Koons family shifting out of there, is there anything else that's significant do you think people should know about before we move forward in their history?
Well, this area does have a reputation as being haunted, and I feel like that Jonathan Koons was one of the people that got this idea started because they believed that something about the landscape was conducive to mediumship. And people still believe that to this day. And so you probably heard of wormholes or vortexes, that kind of thing.
Sure, sure.
And a lot of people in this area feel that the neighborhood where the Coonses lived is that type of place. But
Oh,
then,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
I just thought, but go ahead.
but then it kind of spread like there's a lot of other ghostly stories and supernatural stories that don't involve his neighborhood, and some of them involve the town of Athens, which had a mental hospital for a number of years.
Those mental hospitals, yikes. Stuff that went on with them. Oh, I was just remembering, wasn't Johnny Appleseed had some tie to that area and to the Coons as well at one point, right?
Well, he was a believer in Swedenborg's philosophies, and that was a precursor. That was a Christian mystic who was a precursor of the spiritualist movement.
Yes.
And so Johnny Appleseed or John Chapman converted to Swedenborgianism, and he not only spread the apple orchards on the frontier, but he also spread the Swedenborgian philosophy, and then some of them in turn became spiritualists.
Hmm.
But he did come through Athens County, and he did spend the night here sometimes, and people did get trees from him and plant them. And Jonathan Coons, it turns out, also had an orchard. Um, but Chapman passed away in 1845, so if they had any kind of interaction, it would have probably been uh, between, the 30s and
Right.
45. And so we're not sure. But again, one of those tantalizing possible intersections.
Yes, yes. So then let's go forward um, for what it was like for the family living in that particular area. They're getting swarmed, they're having to feed people, entertain people, they're working hard as being farmers, and things start to change a bit, right?
Yes, they changed. And the family just got really tired of doing this. And were it not for the miracle of my finding this letter that Coons wrote, I would never have understood this. He said that they were also deeply wounded by this criticism.
Mhm.
Not so much Jonathan. Jonathan loved to fight. I mean, he gave as good as he got. If somebody criticized him in the paper, he was ready to fire back. But he said it did really affect his family, and they became very discouraged. And another factor, I believe, was Nim getting older. And so as he gets courting age, I think it's getting harder for him to make all this time in the evening for his dad's project, kind of in a way.
Yeah.
And so Emma Harding Britton, in her analysis, she mentions that she thinks the children aging out also may have been a factor in less psychic activity going on. But
Yeah.
for all those reasons, and also having a big family and wanting more land, they ended up first closing the spirit room in 1855, then going on the road but never being as successful, and then moving to Illinois in 1858 and not being in the public eye anymore.
Mhm. And so the that oldest son. he so he went a courting, as it were. Did he end up getting married and having a family and anything
Yes,
anything more with that?
somehow between doing all these seances, he did manage to find a wife in Athens County, and he got married even before they moved to Illinois, and he had a baby when they moved out there. So yes, he did have a family, and he did conduct mediumship within the family.
Hmm.
And we know that because Jonathan Koons, who really was kind of a journalist at heart too, he had a dispatch sent to the paper about their family mediumship, but Nim was never back out there as a public performer.
Right. He had to focus on family as was right. Do you know did he pursue some sort of career during that time?
Um, Farming, but maybe also owning some stores. I'm not sure exactly.
Hmm. Hmm. And then in terms of your connection, there was a family member, right? One of their descendants that was able to provide you with some information, or is it just exclusively your research?
Oh, I've been very fortunate to be able to talk with some of Jonathan's descendants.
Hmm.
That's been really fascinating to realize the degree to which they know about him and that they have saved things over 150 years. I mean, if you ask me, okay, Sharon, tell me about your second great grandfather on such and such side.
You'd be like,
I'd be lucky to even know the person's name. And yet they know a lot about their ancestor, and they have kept a lot of the family records, and especially the artwork that even one branch of the family has. And I'm just really blessed to have been able to meet with some of them and see the extent to which this spiritualist tradition influenced several generations on down the line, even to this day.
now, are some of those descendants spiritualists, would you say, because of their experience? Are they pursuing in any way, shape, or form mediumship and contact in that way?
Well, not as far as I know, but like one of the ladies of the previous generation, her son said that even though she went to like the Methodist church, every summer she would go to Lily Dale and Cassadaga and places like that. And so others I would call free thinkers that became more involved in 20th or 21st century philosophies, but definitely people who do not beat to a conventional drum.
And is there any sign of the spirit machine, the original spirit machine that was used in the spirit room?
No, I've checked with an antique dealer, and nobody that I've ever talked to has ever found one or a piece of one. And as Brandon Hodge, who's a collector of these things, said, if there was one, it would be the find of the century.
And just because I know we need to wrap up soon, just because it's a tintillating thing, what is a spirit machine?
Well, it depends on who you believe. It was a structure made out of copper and tin plates and wires.
Mhm.
And some people would say, well, it was a primitive battery. It was an attempt to build a battery to conduct electricity. Others who went there and saw it that had some kind of engineering background said it was just a piece of furniture, that it was a prop.
Mhm.
So again, we'll never know, will we?
But it was an element of their spirit room, even when they traveled to Illinois. That was something that they kept as something they utilized, or was in the room when this was going on.
I really have no idea. I wish I knew.
Yeah, whether
I have
that
a
had,
feeling that they probably didn't. wouldn't have had room for it, but I don't know. I mean, they went on Conestoga wagons, so I don't know
Oh, they were, yeah,
if
right.
they would have had room for that or not. But
Right. They're not getting in the minivan to do this.
right.
Well, that's amazing, the history that you've been able to share with us today. Any last things you'd like to share with our viewers today about the Jonathan Koons family or about his mediumship or impact in the world today?
Well, I would just mention that I have a nonfiction book. If you could put that screen up, that'd be great.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. And we clue that in here.
It was published by Swallow Press, which is a imprint of Ohio University Press here in Athens.
Mhm.
And the picture here is adapted from Koons' son Nim's vision of the seven heavens.
Mm.
So I was really happy to get that put on the cover of the book. And I think he is an enigma going forward. He'll always be something of an enigma. Some scholars are starting to pick up on this and do a little bit of their own research and interpretation of things that I've uncovered. So I'm really hopeful going forward that maybe even more information can come to light.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely thing. The more we're able to maintain the history, people can be inspired. I know long ago when I read The History of Spiritualism by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I, as much as you could say, oh, fraud this or how unbelievable that, but it's something, there has to be something real to that, right? There are aspects of that, and it can be inspiring of like, wow, if they can do that, maybe I can too, and have that kind of level of um, transcendence and inspiration that we can offer people through this. And I think knowing where some of these come from, why certain elements of mediumship and physical mediumship are part of our history, and who brought that a little bit more to the surface is so helpful for people, so that they really see that there's the thread, the guiding hand of spirit that is always with us, that helps to lead people to the adventures and the openness of understanding their own souls. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Sharon. It's been wonderful to call you in as a resource for us today. Appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you so much for your very insightful questions and leading me through yet another wonderful exploration of Jonathan Koons.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Everyone, please let Sharon know in the comments that you really appreciate her being on the show today and sharing this with all of you and answering so many wonderful questions about the Jonathan Koons family. And please like, share, subscribe, all of those good things. I'll certainly post a link with this so that if any of you are interested in Sharon's book about Jonathan Koons, that you could go ahead and place your own order. I know this has been in print for a while and it was accessible for people to be able to have that as a reference for them, whether they're fascinated by mediumship or spiritualism or just because. I think it's a great book that we can support spiritualism with. So thank you again for being on the show today, Sharon, and stay tuned, everyone, for another great show next week of Wednesdays with Willa. All right, take care, everyone. Bye bye.